Good day, everyone. My name is Adibowale Daniel. You are welcome to eTutor, an online teaching platform in which we are going to shed more light on the necessary topics as far as WAEC, JAM, and other examination is being concerned. So today in economics, I will be starting with what I call theory of consumer behavior. Called the theory of consumer behavior. Now, as an economics student, whenever you hear the word theory simply means law. Are you getting it now? Theory means law. And how do we derive this law? We derive this law from scientific methods such as observation, hypothesis. What do I mean by hypothesis? Hypothesis simply means a statement or an action or a form of experiment that is being subject to further validation. So whenever we realize that our observations are true, then it becomes a theory. Theory is a fact, a law. Now, under the theory of consumer behavior, why do we call it theory of consumer behavior? We call it theory of consumer behavior due to the fact that we are trying to analyze, we are trying to look into the reaction of consumer in respect to the goods and services. So when a consumer purchases an item, the ultimate aim of a consumer, especially a rational consumer, is to gain highest satisfaction from a particular item bought at the lowest price, in which we are going to say a consumer will ensure that his utility, because the theory of consumer behavior is also called utility, and we use U to represent utility. His utility must be greater than the price of the particular item that is being purchased. Are you getting it now? So under this theory of consumer behavior, we are going to look at two things. What are the two things we want to look at? We call it the utility approach. What are the two utility approach? The first utility approach, they belong to a particular schools of thought. We call them the cardinal schools of thought. The cardinal schools of thought. The second utility approach or concept, they are called the ordinalist schools of thought. Are you getting me? So these cardinal schools of thought and ordinal schools of thought, they are the two major utility theory or concept or approach which we use to determine our utility. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is the cardinal schools of thought. Now, according to these cardinal schools of thought, it is based on the principle that consumer satisfaction can be measured in numerical terms called UTIs. We can quantify utility. We make use of science, figures, numbers to measure the level of the consumer satisfaction. And for these cardinal schools of thought, they also believe that for a consumer to gain maximum satisfaction or to be at equilibrium level, is marginal utility, which we all call MU, must be equal to the price of his product. What is marginal utility? Marginal utility is one of the concepts of utility we have. We have three concepts of utility. We have the total utility, the average utility, and the marginal utility. And the curve of a marginal utility is always downward sloping, just like the demand curve. Just like the demand curve. Why is this downward sloping? We are going to talk about relationship between the total utility, the marginal utility, the demand curve, the value of goods and services, and the price. And how does it go? Whenever the total utility of a consumer is increasing, the marginal utility of that consumer will fall. What is utility? Utility simply means satisfaction. The ability of an item purchased to render a certain level of satisfaction to a consumer at a particular period of time. And one thing about utility is that utility, it is relative. When I say utility is relative, the satisfaction I will derive from a particular product is different from another person's, due to the fact that consumers, we all have different way in which we react or in which we want to gain satisfaction to goods and services. So let us continue. As I was saying, I said for the cardinal schools of thought, they make use of the marginal utility. They are also called the marginal utility theory. The marginal utility theory. Now, let me quickly shed more light about these schools of thought. These schools of thought was first discovered in the 20th century by some set of classical economists such as Alfred Marshall, William Sterling, and so on. So the assumption of this cardinalist is based on the fact that the additional satisfaction derived in respect to the additional quantity of the item consumed must be equal to the price of that item, which we call the marginal utility per price. Are you getting it now? So the derivation of this equilibrium is as a result of the fact that utility of a particular item, let's assume the utility of x, or the total utility of, you can also call it total utility of x, is always a function of the quantity of x. Don't forget, I said their own assumption is that utility can be quantified, and the numerical terms we use in quantifying utility is called utils. We measure it in utils, we use signs, figures, and so on. So utility of x is a function of what? Quantity of x. But don't forget, the quantity is being bought at a particular price. So how do we get that? We say utility of x equals the price of x and what? The quantity of what? X. Whenever we multiply this and this together, we are going to arrive at our what? Utils, in which there must be what? Equal. Are you getting what I'm saying? So to get this now, we will need to differentiate in respect to what? To Q. How do we differentiate? Now, let us find the differential calculus of this by saying changes in the utility of x, quantity of x, over changes quantity of x equals changes in the price of x, quantity of x, over changes in the quantity of what? Of x. Now when we look at this particular one, it is also the same thing as our what? Marginal utility. What is the formula for our marginal utility? Marginal utility simply means the changes in the total utility in respect to changes in quantity. It is the quantity, changes in quantity, that will determine the changes in what? Utility, which is also called satisfaction. So we say changes in total utility over what? Changes in quantity, or we can also say total utility of the second item minus total utility of the what? Of the first item over quantity of the second item minus what? Quantity of the first item. So this is the same thing as this. So if this is our what? Marginal utility of which commodity x will be equals to, now we can cancel by saying this in this, they are both common. Qx cancel Qx, so we have what? Price of what? Of x. That's how we arrive at this what? Equilibrium. That is the assumption of the cardinalist schools of thought. That is for a single product. However, if it is for two or more, let's assume a consumer consumes two different items, x and y. What will be the equilibrium? Now we can say if marginal utility of x equals to the price of x, definitely the marginal utility of y will be equal to the what? Price of y. Yes or no? Now the next thing to do is to cross multiply. When we cross multiply, definitely the marginal utility of x will be equal to the what? We multiply the price of what? Of x, while also the marginal utility of what? Of y, we multiply the what? The price of what? Of x. Items, let's assume commodity x and commodity y. The consumer's equilibrium based on the cardinalist assumption theory is that the marginal utility of x will be equals to the marginal utility of what? Y. Marginal utility of x, then over price of x, marginal utility of y over price of what? Y. This is for two commodities. While for three or more, let's assume x, y, and z. Then it will be marginal utility of x over price of x equals the marginal utility of y over price of y, then equals the marginal utility of z over price of what? Z. Now how can we get this? Now the derivation of this equilibrium is when we say mux equals px. Also we can say muy equals py. Now this simply means the ratio of the marginal satisfaction of the two products, the prices of the two products. So we can cross multiply. Now when we cross multiply, we are going to have MUX multiplied by PY equals MUY multiplied by PX. So let's move further. Now, how do we get this? How do we get this? Now we can get this by saying, let's divide both sides by PX and PY. So this is divide both sides by PX, PY, PX, PY. So what is common? PY is common, PX is common. So the final answer will now be MUX over PX, which is here, equals what? MUY over what? PY. This is the consumer's equilibrium according to the cardinal school of thought for two different commodities. So this is the ultimate aim of the cardinal schools of thought. Now, to a rational consumer, the number one important factor is that we always make sure that our marginal utility is greater than our price. Don't forget I told you that the theory of consumer behavior is simply talking about the reaction of a consumer in respect to the price and the satisfaction of an item being consumed. So for a consumer, I will make sure that I gain the ultimate satisfaction, the highest satisfaction at the lowest price of that product. For instance, if I'm to buy a bread, let's assume the bread is 15 naira. I will make sure that from that 15 naira, I want to gain highest satisfaction. I prefer to buy it at lesser price, gaining higher satisfaction, than buying it at higher price and gaining what? Lesser satisfaction. That is to a rational consumer. And why do you call them rational consumer? They follow the first law of demand. That is, the higher the price, the what? The lower the quantity. Now, if you look at the marginal utility curve, you can see it is downward sloping. Why is this downward sloping? Because it is explaining the law of demand. There is a positive relationship between the law of demand and the law of what? Marginal utility. Are you getting it now? Don't forget, look at what I said. I said, for the total utility of a consumer, whenever it increases, the marginal utility will fall. This is always used to explain the law of diminishing marginal utility. For a consumer that consumes a successive unit of a particular item, at first, the satisfaction will increase, but a dissatisfaction will occur at a point which is called saturation point, whereby additional unit of consumption will lead to decrease in satisfaction. When there is decrease in satisfaction, that means the marginal utility is what? Falling, as total utility is what? Increasing. And when marginal utility falls, you now want to demand again because you have gotten tired of that product. So demand will fall. Once demand falls, the value of that item will fall due to fall in demand, and when the value falls, the price to the consumer will what? Will fall. Are you getting it now? So for a rational consumer, the equilibrium point is that MU equals P, but our own ultimate goal is that our marginal utility must be greater than our what? Our price. And if this happens, what happens to demand? Demand will increase because this thing I'm buying at lesser price, I'm gaining satisfaction. Let me continue to buy more. But when I realize that as I am buying more, the price is increasing, I'm gaining lesser satisfaction. That means my demand will fall. So whenever MU is lesser than price, the demand will fall. That is the relationship between marginal utility and demand curve. Let's quickly move further to the second school of thought. Now we are done with the cardinalists. They are also called the marginal utility theory. And I said it was discovered in the 20th century by some group of classical economists such as Alfred Marshall, William Stanley, and so on and so forth. So the second school of thought we are going to be looking at is known as the ordinalist. They are called the ordinalist schools of thought. Ordinalist schools of thought. I shortened it. The SOT, schools of thought. Now, you see these ordinalist schools of thought. It was introduced, or let me just say pioneered, by a Russian economist known as Igor Slutsky. Now, in an advanced economic theory, I would advise for those prospective economists, you should be more familiar with ordinalists due to the fact that we use this as a reference in other microeconomic phenomena. So, what is the ordinalist all about? The ordinalist school of thought is based on the principle that utility cannot be ranked. They countered the assumption, or let me just say the hypothesis of the cardinal schools of thought. They said utility cannot be ranked, utility cannot be measured, rather it can only be ranked. How can we rank utility? It can be ranked using what we call indifference curve theory. What did I say? Indifference curve theory. Now, Ordinary schools of thought are also called indifference curve theory. Why do you call them indifference curve theory? Because they make use of indifference curve, they make use of budget line, they make use of different graphs to ascertain the equilibrium point of a consumer. Now, despite the fact that it countered the assumption of the cardinalist, if you are to look at it vividly, clearly, we are going to realize that they are still saying the same thing, just that the approach to the ascertainment of consumer satisfaction is different. Now look at, they are called the indifference curve theory. So what is an indifference curve? The first question that should come to your mind is, what is an indifference curve? Now when we talk about an indifference curve is a slope, because in it is a slope. A slope is also the same thing as a gradient. It is showing the changes between two variables, in which one is dependent and the other is independent. A slope is a curve that is slant. It could be positive when it slopes upward, and it is negative when it slopes downward. But for an indifference curve, it has a negative slope. This is how an indifference curve looks like. Now, why do we call it an indifference curve? From the English word indifference. Indifference simply means when you are not affected by anything. You feel indifference to some particular factors. For example, as a consumer, whether you consume more of X, less of Y, or more of Y, less of X, you are indifferent to the satisfaction. The major important thing is that the combination of these two products will yield the same level of satisfaction. So what is an indifference curve? It is a graph or a curve or a gradient which is used to show the level of substitution between two different items, commodity X and Y, in which one is consumed more than the other, or vice versa, that will yield the same level of satisfaction. This curve, indifference curve, is depicting the changes in the marginal utility of the two commodities. If this is rice and this is what? This is beans. The slope of the indifference curve is measuring the marginal utility of rice, which we can say Y, over the marginal utility of what? X, which we can say what? Beans. So let's just say X. So the indifference curve is used to measure the ratio of the changes in the what? Marginal satisfaction of two different things. The characteristics of an indifference curve, there are many. One of the characteristics is that it is limiting the commodity into two, due to the fact that in a graph you only have two axes, X and Y. An indifference curve is negatively sloped because it is sloping downward. It is showing an inverse relationship between the what? The marginal satisfaction of these two commodities combined. However, don't forget what I said, the satisfaction remains the same. It does not change. Do you get that? So another characteristics of an indifference curve is that it does not, or is that if it gets closer to the point of origin, the satisfaction will be lesser. If it moves further from the point of origin, the satisfaction will increase. That is why we can have more than one indifference curve. Let's assume we have an indifference curve before this. Let's see, this is indifference curve 1, this is 2. It simply means at indifference curve 2, the consumer has tendency that there will be higher satisfaction compared to what? Indifference curve 1. The only time there will be changes in satisfaction is when we have more than one indifference curve on the graph. Don't forget, before this indifference curve, consumers must spend. We call it budget. How do we measure the budget of a consumer? The budget of a consumer is denoted by Y. We calculate the consumer's income, also called consumer's budget, as price multiplied by quantity. Just like under the theory of revenue, you want to calculate revenue, you say PQ will give you your TR. So this is income, or consumer's income, also called consumer's budget. This is the price multiplied by the quantity. So if he is consuming rice and beans, what will be the formula for calculating the consumer's income for rice and beans? It will now be Y equals the price of, let's start with X, which is beans, quantity of beans, plus price of rice, quantity of what? Rice. This is the formula for finding the what? The budget. And we have what we call budget line, a line that shows the combination of two items that is to be spent that is to be consumed by a what? A consumer or an individual when money is being spent out. So this is what we call a consumer's budget line. This is a consumer's budget line. So the extreme of this simply means he is not spending money on what? X. The extreme of this simply means he is not spending any money on what? On Y. So that means at the extreme of this, it will not be the consumer's income over what? P of X. The consumer's income here over what? P of what? Y. One relationship between the indifference curve and the budget line is that there is what we call point of tangency. The consumer's equilibrium, according to the ordinalist, is that the indifference curve must be tangential to the budget line. When we say it is tangential to the budget line, simply means it rests directly on the budget line, in which at the point of equilibrium, it is not above it, neither is it below it. So if this is the indifference curve 1, in this case we can't see any point of tangency. However, we can see 2 points of intersection, but we are looking for the point whereby it will be tangential to it without having any space. So this is a consumer's indifference curve. Now, one thing about the budget line you should know is that it is measuring the ratio of the prices between the two commodities. That is, this is measuring price of X over price of what? Of Y. While this is measuring the marginal utility of X over the marginal utility of what? Of Y. So if I'm to refer you back to what we did earlier, according to the cardinals, I said for a consumer to gain equilibrium, MUX over MUY must be equal to PX over what? PY. Same thing we are saying, but one thing is that to get this and this, they are equal once the indifference curve is tangential to the budget line. So if I'm to have another indifference curve in this manner, this is indifference curve 2, you realize that at this point it is tangential, it is equal. We call it point of consumer's optimality. Consumer's optimality. So if you are asked, in this point, where does a consumer attain point of tangency or equilibrium? We say at this point, let's say this is point K. At point K, why? Because the indifference curve is tangential to the budget line. How do we know? The indifference curve measures the ratio of the what? Marginal utility of the two products, while the budget line measures the prices of the two products. So when they are equal, this is tangential to this. Now, one thing is, whenever the indifference curve is above the budget line, just above the budget line, let's assume you have indifference curve 3, satisfaction is not realistic because you cannot spend more than your budget. Are you getting it now? We can have an indifference curve drawn below the budget line, but one thing is, if indifference curve is closer to the point of origin, there is lesser satisfaction. So between these 3 indifference curve, the highest satisfaction is not at indifference curve 3. Why? Satisfaction is not realistic. It is not at indifference curve 1 because it is not tangential to the budget line, but at indifference curve 2 because it is tangential to the budget line. So I will stop on this note. We'll see in the next class.